Welcome. This is a reminder to silence all electronic devices. Please put your phones in worship mode. My name is Zev, and my pronouns are they, them. And it may feel a little queer to you that I'm your service leader today, but I'm always queer, so I guess we're even. You may know our presenter as Reverend Mary Martin, she, her. But I know her as my mom. 2 Sundays a month, our services are led by my mom, and the other 2 Sundays we are lay-led, reflecting the diverse gifts of our fellowship, as well as invited speakers whose messages speak our principles as Unitarian Universalists. If you are visiting today, we hope you will return more than once to experience the range of messages and insights our speakers offer. You are welcome to join us following the service for coffee and conversation. You are all welcome here. Whoever you are, whoever you love, and wherever you are on your spiritual journey, you are welcome here. Genderbread, a recipe by Gabby Cadenhead. They, them. In a bowl, add 150 grams of active curiosity. Make sure it's nice and bubbly to 350 grams of room temperature questions, and mix. To this mixture, add 500 grams of your disintegrating selfhood and 10 grams of dismantling binaries, then mix with the feeling of wearing overalls for the first time. At this stage, your gender will be a sticky, shaggy mess. Allow it to hydrate for 30 minutes, or days, or months. Use the stretch and fold method. Each time you'll notice the dough become easier to stretch and your gender become more elastic. Total fermentation time can take anywhere from 3 months to 8 years. To shape the dough, experiment with language. Knead into the blurred edges of your emerging selfhood. Let your gender prove between 1 and 4 identity crises until it passes the poke test. You good? Okay. Bake your gender bread at 250 degrees until it makes peace with sitting in uncertainty. Remove your left loaf from the oven and leave it to cool. Resist the urge to slice it early. Your selfhood does not need to be cut into more digestible chunks. Enjoy your gender bread and repeat.
We
A reading is by Zev Martin. Hey, that's me. Non-binary. Are you afraid of yourself? Afraid? Yourself. Why? Question. Why? Deny. Why would I do that? Of course not. Children all across America are being brainwashed by queer people. Question. Are you afraid of yourself? Why? The in-between, the both, is scary for those who have gone under an oath to deny and hate and have the privilege to never question. Are you afraid of yourself, and why?
I don't know if you can tell. Maybe you can. This service is a really big deal to me. And so on the outside, maybe I look pretty calm. But on the inside, there's a little version of me that is dancing for joy and also is terrified because I want to get this right. If you know anything about my family story, you know why that's so important. If you don't know my family story, well, buckle up, Buttercup, because we're in this together. I begin with a request. I ask that you hear my words as I intend them, which is to be loving, affirming, and kind. We are going to navigate into waters that are still shifting and changing as our siblings are still reclaiming themselves and their identities after years of being demonized and othered. And when the waters are shifting, language changes. And so while we work hard to learn these things today, that may mean that we still have to learn another term to replace something that we learn today in the future. May we seek, truly, to see the inherent worth and dignity of each person so fiercely that we see this learning as a worthwhile venture. In 2019, I sat in my office at a hospital about an hour from here, and I watched as the church that raised me allowed people to step up to microphones and say horrific things about the colleagues and friends who had spent their lives devoted to their faith and to their church, all because their colleagues identified or cared for people who were LGBTQIA2+ in that community. This was happening as that conference was broadcast all over the world. That day, the denomination would vote 53% to 47% to adopt what they called the traditional plan, which kept the language in their doctrine that claimed that homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teachings, along with some pretty strict penalties for gay clergy who did not abstain from relationships and those who performed same-gendered marriages. The next day, I wrote a letter resigning from my denomination. I didn't know what it would mean for my career, but I knew that I could no longer stand by silently. In those moments, I was shamed by my conservative colleagues for standing up in defense of what they called sin. And I was also shamed by my progressive colleagues for not staying in the denomination to fight for change. But they'd been offering the same promises all 7 years that I had been on my ordination track, that things would change, that I just needed to stay and fight. That wasn't for me. I couldn't stand before the bishop and agree to uphold a doctrine of the church when I knew it would be a lie. My integrity was more important. That was 6 years ago. And the denomination has finally recently split, and things are still messy. But 2 years after I sat in my office in uncertainty about what was going to happen next, my youngest child started the process of coming out. Friends, I am a fierce ally. Stu and I truly were trying to raise our children to see all people as worthy and deserving of love. We've been going to a liberal 4-day spirit, justice, and music and arts festival since Zev was literally potty training in the corner of the tent. We attended this festival long before we knew either of our kids would be a part of the community. I left my former denomination before I had any idea. We deeply believe in justice, equity, and compassion as a family. And I'm so thankful that we did the things that we did because it gave my ENBY the courage to come out and to know that they would be loved. Last time I spoke to you all, I gave you the disclaimer that I am not a scientist, but that I was going to be science-y for a while. Well, history often repeats itself. In more ways than one, because I'm going to say some science-y stuff today, and also gender outside of a binary is history repeating itself. It's anything but a new concept. But first, let's have some definitions, shall we? And you may already know all of these definitions, but if you do, then let's do them for me, because sometimes this is like trying to hold on to Jell-O. Okay? So you have an insert in your bulletin. I'm just going to read exactly what is on there. So, You can look at it or not, whatever makes you comfortable. A social construct is something that we as a society create and accept. Social constructs are how we categorize people, especially related to gender, race, or class level, etc. A person's sex has to do with their biology, usually specifically to do with their external anatomy, although, as we will see, it's not quite that simple. Intersex is a term that is used to describe someone who's born with some combination of both male and female biological traits. Intersex people can identify as female, male, or non-binary. Gender is a social construct that was created to be a shorthand for roles, behavior, and expectations placed on a person as a part of society. The gender binary is the two-party system approach to understanding gender identity. It is based on the idea that there are only two genders, male or female. To be cisgendered means that you identify or understand yourself to be the sex that you were assigned at birth. These next few terms essentially mean the same or very similar things, but people may identify more with one term or another to describe themselves, so it's important that we know them. Non-binary is a term used for people who do not identify with the gender binary options of male or female. Gender variant or gender nonconforming and gender queer also refer to people whose gender identity does not fit within the binary. To be transgender is to identify with a gender other than the gender that you were assigned at birth. This can include people who transition their gender on the binary, for example, female to male, and those who identify as non-binary. However, not all non-binary people identify as transgender. TGNC is an abbreviation used for transgender non-conforming. So TGNC equals transgender non-conforming. Gender fluid is the understanding of gender as something that can change either over time or depending on the circumstances. And it can apply to a person's gender expression and or their gender identity. AFAB is an abbreviation meaning assigned female at birth. AMAB, assigned male at birth. Dead name, a name that a transgender person no longer identifies with and has therefore stopped using. Sometimes it is a birth name, other times it is not. I'm almost finished. I know, that's why I gave it to you on paper, because it's a lot of words. I'm almost there. Sexual orientation is related to what gender groups an individual finds sexually attractive. ENBY, ENBY, is shorthand for non-binary. A caveat, because this wasn't already complicated enough. The abbreviation for non-binary would possibly naturally be NB. However, people of color have asked that we not use this abbreviation because in the Black Lives Matter movement, NB means non-black. And for someone to identify as non-binary and also be of color to be forced to circle NB on a form would be akin to erasing part of their identity. NB, ENBY, can be used as both an adjective or a noun. For example, they are NB. Or, as a parent of a non-binary child, I could say, my NB is 13 years old. Not all people who identify as non-binary use the term NB, but it is really popular. I think that's enough of that, don't you? That was a lot. All right. I mentioned that sometimes history repeats itself earlier, and that is what is happening as people begin to rediscover gender outside of a fixed binary system. There may be a tendency of us, those of us who are cisgendered, to ask the question, when did non-binary become a thing? Well, actually, it's much easier to answer the question, when did the idea of the gender binary begin? From ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs showing evidence of a third gender to the Bisu in Indonesia, who have always recognized 5 different genders, the binary is certainly a much newer idea. Mux is a third gender that exists in Mexico, and those identifying as Mux have been recognized and celebrated as playing an integral role in that community since pre-colonial times. You may have noticed that our abbreviations got longer in recent months or years. Maybe you've heard someone say LGBTQIA2+. The 2 isn't a joke. It was a term that was started in the 1990s to help us communicate the similarities and differences related to gender in Native cultures. The term is new, but the understanding of gender is something other than the binary. Is not new. It often refers to someone in Native cultures with a mixed gender roles found among indigenous North American cultures, in which the person expresses themselves and performs functions attributed to both men and women. It can refer to gender identity, gender expression, and/or sexual orientation. Moving over to Norway, there's a story of a non-binary person named Jens Anderson who was believed to be male at some point, married a female when it was unlawful to do so, and turned out that after the wedding happened, the wife said, "This isn't a man." And there's notes from the trial. We have record of the trial, and the trial says Anderson was asked, "Are you a man or a woman?" And the recorded answer was, he thinks he may be both. There are, of course, examples of gender expressions outside of the binary in all sorts of ancient faith traditions and mythology. In ancient Greece, stories of Dionysus, Hermaphroditus, and others lend themselves to helping us understand that being non-binary is not a new thing. Even in the Hebrew scriptures, as I tread very lightly, in the creation story, God refers to God's self as they. In Christianity, throughout the 1700s, our Quaker friends here in the U.S. had a lovely non-binary preacher called the Public Universal Friend, who, after having suffered a serious illness, claimed to have died and come back to life as a person without gender. They traveled all over the northeastern U.S., and their followers came to be known as the Society of Universal Friends, which still exists today. So if the better question is, where did the gender binary come from? Then let's ask that question, shall we? During the Enlightenment period in Europe, scientists began to describe human anatomy using a 2-sex model. That's literally what they called it, the 2-sex model. And unfortunately, as other people were colonized by Europe, they pushed this idea of the binary as a matter of identifying and controlling people. They demonized people who didn't fit into one of those 2 identities, and even criminalized those who didn't fit in it. Anything outside of the binary was seen as deviant and barbaric. It's hard to hear, but the gender binary is deeply rooted in patriarchy and white supremacy. And the truth is that the human body is naturally sexually indeterminate. We are not a binary. Renowned biologist, sex and gender expert Anne Fausto Sterling says that by the time a baby is born, they have 5 layers of sex. The first is chromosomal sex, the second, fetal gonadal sex, the third, fetal hormonal sex, the fourth, internal reproductive sex, and the 5th is external genitalia. Admittedly, much of the layers build upon one another. Fetal hormonal sex, for example, is in the fetal development, affects the development of internal reproductive sex. However, we don't know how often there's a discrepancy between any of the layers. Fast forward from the Enlightenment to the 1950s, John Money, who Zev wants to make sure you know is not Johnny Cash. John Money is not the hero in this story. A scientist and scholar normalized the belief that children were born malleable enough to use surgery, and hormones to correct their bodies if they were born with genitals that were somewhat ambiguous. He founded the Gender Identity Clinic at Johns Hopkins. He experimented on children, and his tactics were terrible. Money believed that if a child who was born anatomically male was raised as a female, that person would grow up to be attracted to males and live as a female. Most of his science now was exposed as fraud, specifically the John Jones study, but the damage had already been done. Money birthed the idea of gender identity, as well as the perceived idea that sexuality is a result of nurture rather than being born this way. What we know now is that even anatomically, there are more sexes than male and female. In parts of the world where it's legal and destigmatization has begun, the numbers of children born intersex is surprising. About 2 in every 100 children in the U.S. are born intersex. For context, the percentage of natural redheads in our country is lower than that. Ironically, Zev was born with red hair. When they were coming out, they tried on the idea of being pansexual, and they didn't tell me directly. I heard them tell someone else. And so later on, when we were alone, I sat in the room with them and I asked questions that I already knew the answer to. I was a little pushy about wanting them to answer me because I'd already heard it. And also, hello, if anyone is safe, I'm safe. You can tell me, I thought. They did eventually tell me that night. But as I went over the conversation in my head, I had a lot of regrets. I talked to a friend about it and realized that I should have let them come out on their own without me pushing them out of the closet. A few minutes later, they texted their dad and asked to buy a lesbian flag. Y'all, youth group kids came out to me when I was still in this other denomination. Why wouldn't my kid talk to me about this? So I asked them casually, that flag that you sent to your dad, it's a lesbian flag? Yes. Oh, okay. So is that something that feels like it's more you than being pansexual? Yes. Okay, let's go get dinner. A few more months would go by and they shared that they wanted to use she, they pronouns, which implied that they were identifying outside of the gender binary. It didn't take long after that, after they heard someone say they, them, and use it in a sentence for them, that they decided to drop she entirely and switched entirely to they, them. Then one day, walking through a parking lot, holding my hand, they said to me that they wanted to begin to go by the name Zev. And I asked them if I could still call them their birth name. And they reluctantly agreed. But I know it wasn't what they really wanted. Their birth name was important to their dad and to me. But I had to learn that this wasn't about us. It was about them. I share these things with you because even though I thought of myself as a staunch ally, if I could go back and do it over, I would. I would never have pressured them to tell me before they were ready. I would have celebrated their coming out in their own time, and I would have acknowledged the bravery that it took for them to tell me that they had a preferred name, and I would have celebrated that too. As a cisgendered person, I have the privilege of not understanding what it's like to not feel like my gender fits. I'll never be able to understand that experience firsthand, but I'm so thankful that we as a society are returning to a broader understanding of who we are. And so my kid uses they, them pronouns. And often there's a gristling about using what we identify as a plural pronoun to describe a singular individual. I want to encourage you first that you already do this when you don't know the person about whom you are speaking. For example, please don't do this, but if someone hit my car in the parking lot today and left, I might say, someone hit my car in the parking lot and they just left. I know, they didn't even stop. There are actually other pronouns that are less popular than they, them, and I've printed them out in your insert as well. Some of them feel much different than our common language. They're rough, they're difficult to relearn, and so be grateful for they, them. That's all I'm saying. They will require work and practice. We have to practice at it to get it right. After Zev came out to me and gave me permission to talk about it, I started practicing when I talked about them at work using the correct pronouns. I practiced being able to get it right because it was and is important to me. Non-binary people are reclaiming something that was stolen by the patriarchy. They are putting themselves back in the narrative and unapologetically bucking a binary system that simply doesn't fit the broad spectrum of who people really are. They are changing the world, and we can help them. In their book, In Transit, Being Non-Binary in a World of Dichotomies, Diana Anderson suggests that those of us that are cisgendered should question ourselves. Before we expect trans people to answer our questions, we should take some time to write down what describes us, both gendered and ungendered. Think about what you think describes a man, a woman, a non-binary person. Genuinely challenge yourself to think about where your identity fits in that realm. Ask yourself, why do I believe that I'm a woman? What makes me say that I'm a man? Interrogate yourself beyond biology. Would I still feel like a woman if I didn't have a uterus? Would I still identify as a man if I got testicular cancer? What parts of myself do I see as vital to my gender? Question who you are. What made you cisgender? And attempt to put yourself mentally into a body that reads different from your current one. They continue, before you start doing anything with trans people, you need to interrogate yourself about why you believe that you are the way that you are. It's just like asking a gay person why they're gay. It's just as reasonable to ask a straight person why they're straight. Trans people can't be the only ones taking on the burden of introspecting and thinking carefully about their own gender. Once you've done that work on yourself, you'll probably understand a bit better what it's like for transgender and non-binary people to be who they are. In recent years, this fellowship did the work of becoming a welcoming congregation. It's one of the reasons I'm here. We were walking in and seeing Stephanie and seeing the pronouns on some of the name tags. It's the reason we stayed. One of the commitments set out in that agreement was this: a welcoming congregation does not assume anyone's affectional, sexual orientation, and or gender identity. And the vocabulary of worship reflects this perception. Worship celebrates diversity by inclusivity of language and content. Inclusivity of language includes using things like friends instead of ladies and gentlemen. And it does include being willing to work and learn on retraining our brains to using the pronouns that people ask us to do. It means we might be corrected if we misgender someone. And we need to understand that the person who is correcting us is doing it because they care about being in relationship with us. It's not enough to roll our eyes and say, this is how I learned it and it's hard to unlearn. I promise you that there are very few people in this room right now that love a turn of phrase more than I do. I love language. I love a double entendre. I love to be able to articulate my thoughts and dance with my words. Trust me, if I can do this, you can too. And committing to this means avoiding certain microaggressions and reframing our language. Someone can be non-binary and still appear to be binary to us. We see the world through a binary lens because it's part of our identity. But non-binary people do not owe us androgyny. Just as cisgendered women and men have the right to dress how they would like and wear makeup or not, non-binary people do as well. We won't do it perfectly. I know I won't, because I didn't do so great the first time around. We will make mistakes and fumble, and when we do, we should correct ourselves and move on. And so today, in the interest of living into that commitment you made when you became a welcoming congregation, I want to invite you, when the service is over, to find the label sheets on the foyer table. There are some that have rainbow flags on them. If that is your jam, please put the rainbow flag on. If you don't want to, that's okay too. There are plain white ones that say he, him, his, she, her, hers, they, them, theirs. And then there's a couple of the more complicated ones on there too, if that's what you identify with. And I commit to you that I will learn it. I will, most definitely. And there are some that are blank as well, if you want to fill in your own. There are Post-it notes. If your gender doesn't fit any of those, I would be honored to print a different set that does fit for you. But I encourage you, in order to make it clear who we are and to live into the commitment that we've already made by becoming a welcoming congregation, that even if you are cisgendered, that we make pronouns a thing and that we stop assuming. It may seem like a minor thing, but it really does make a difference in putting ourselves out into the world as allies. If we don't do this very simple thing to show that we are allies, what will we do in bigger situations when trans people are in danger? We are called to help those and speak up against injustices. And just by putting your pronouns on a name tag, we tell people who are visiting us that we are safe for them to talk to. I have a picture of Zeb. When we first moved here, they have a really cute little school picture they have long hair in it, but their smile is not really there. My mom used to say, "Smile with your eyes, Mary." That's how she knew it was a real smile, right? The smile was not there. They started to come out throughout that year, and that summer, I took them to their first Pride Festival in Greenville. And they're wearing a rainbow shirt, and their hair is partially bleached. And they are smiling bigger than I had seen them smile since they were a toddler. Over the course of that year, in pictures, you can see them coming into themselves. Their smile is wider. It's as if the weight of the world had been lifted off their shoulders. As a mom, I want what's best for my kids. And I don't know what I'm doing half the time, but that wouldn't be any different if my children were cisgendered and straight. And so I guess this is just the way life is. We're all just stumbling through it together. And I hope you'll commit to do it together with our non-binary friends. And so it is.
Blessed are the queer by H.P. Rivers, they, them.
Blessed are the wanderers seeking affirmation.
Blessed are the worshipers praying from closets, pulpits, pews, and hardships.
Blessed are the lovers of leaving family and familiarity, leaving tables where love is not being served.
Blessed are those who stay.
Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for justice, for they will be satisfied.
Blessed are the queer, disciples of truth, living, breathing, sacred reflections of divine love.
Peace be with you. What did I do? Get out. Not all the way done pushing them around. I got a few more years. I invite you into a moment of quiet reflection as we lift up those who have shared today and all of those that we love. Queer by Zev Martin, They Them. Hey, that's you. You never know what to say when all the ones who left you in disarray realize they're just like you, queer and afraid.